name.
Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless you in the name of the Lord.
Thank you. Minor prophets. And lesson number 80. That's a lot.
Doesn't
We
seem
are-
like it's been that long.
Yeah, well, you see from that beginning that we started in February of 2022. But when you've got 12 minor prophets, yes, it takes a while to work through it. But Zechariah is the next to the last book, and we ought to be able to move pretty quickly through the book of Zechariah. And especially on these visions, I hope to get at least 2, maybe 3 done this morning. And as we do that, because we took a look last week with the vision of the 4 horsemen, how basically to go through it and break it down and look at the individual parts, and then take that and apply it to what was going on then, and even make some comments into, like the message for the prophet, and then bring it into our time. You know, relate that to the book of Revelation because of the apocalyptic literature, and how those 4 horsemen relate to the 4 horsemen in Revelation chapter 6 and Revelation chapter 7 with the 4 winds. So we'll get on with this Zechariah chapter 1 verses 18 through 21, the vision of horns and craftsmen. And what this is going to do is just carry on a theme that goes throughout the scriptures. It's specifically for their time, though. And there are 2 different ways you can look at it. There's a narrow view and then there's a broader view. So, and we'll take a look at that. But the theme of horns and craftsmen, chaos and order, is a constant theme throughout the scriptures. God is a God of order, and he created everything out of chaos. Did God create the chaos in the beginning? Yeah, when he created the heavens and the earth, what was there? Book of Genesis. Waters was on the face of the deep. What is water? Water has no structure, does it? You take water and, okay, I'm going to pile up water here. So I dump the water out. The water has no structure. So what did God do? He brought structure out. The land brought that out, and that's bringing order out of the chaotic situation that was there. And you just go all through scriptures. You go to the garden, you go to the flood, you go to the Exodus account. How much water is there? Okay, what's Moses? What does the name Moses mean? He's drawn out of the water. Okay, because he was put in the water. Why was he put in the water?
To hide him,
To save his life.
save him.
It's not why he was put in the water.
To be found by Pharaoh's daughter, and then people took.
That's not why he was put in the water.
God had a plan for
To
him.
get him in the
Something
place
else.
where he could do God's work.
That's not why he was put in the water. All that was why he was put in the ark, the basket. Why was he put in the water of the Nile River?
Killing all the babies.
To kill all the babies, which is what? That's chaos by the tyrant Pharaoh. You follow me? Throw him in the water. Why? There's no structure in the water. The baby will drown. What does his mother do? His mother obeys Pharaoh. She puts him in the water, but she puts him in an ark where his life is going to be saved. Fabulous woman, right? How many women heroes are there in the scriptures?
Several.
Bunches of them. Here you got the mother, you got the daughter, right? And Pharaoh's daughter, only Pharaoh's daughter could have gotten away with pulling Moses out of the water and bringing him to Pharaoh's house. Anybody else, what would have happened to them? Right? Pharaoh's daughter. So, order and chaos is where we're going to go with this. Or chaos and then order. In the vision of the horns and craftsmen. So let's read it, verses 18 through the end of the chapter. What is that, 21? All right. And again, Zechariah, these are what's called night visions. He's sleeping and he's awakened, or he sees them and dream. It's kind of fuzzy on the details of how this happens, whether he's transported there, whether he sees them like there's a television screen on his wall, and we don't know, but he sees this, whether it's in his mind or literally. Here's the vision. And I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, 4 horns. And when he says horns, what's he talking about? Horns, like cow's horns, or not necessarily antlers, but a unicorn would have 1 horn, but the 4 horns, and individually he's seeing these horns. And I said to the angel who talked with me, excuse me, a little asthmatic there this morning, and we talked about that angel last week. There's an angel who accompanies him that talks to him about the visions that he's seeing, just like in the book of Revelation with John, right? As John's going through the visions in the book of Revelation, there's an angel who's accompanying him and explaining stuff to him, right? Apocalyptic literature, there you go. There's a good reference back for you. And I said to the angel who talked with me, what are these? And he said to me, these are horns that have scattered, notice that, past tense, right? Have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. Then the Lord showed me 4 craftsmen. What are craftsmen?
People have skills.
Skilled people who build things, okay? So carpenters, masons, stone masons, brick masons, such as plumbers, okay? You get the idea there. And I said, what are these coming to do? He said, these are the horns that scattered Judah so that no one raised his head. In other words, no one stood up against them. And these have come to terrify them, to cast down the horns of the nations who lifted up their horns against the land of Judah, to scatter it. So one's the horns, they've come to scatter Judah, and these, the craftsmen, have come to terrify them. Terrify who? The horns, right? To cast down the horns of the nations who lifted up their horns against the land of Judah, to scatter it. So, notice up here, 2 views of this. The broad view, over spectrum type view, is that it's Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, and Medo-Persia. If you read some of the scholars, some of the really good, the ones that people go to and will reference a lot, this is some of the things that they will say. And Egypt, of course, you think about Israel, or the Hebrew children in Egypt to begin with, and Egypt was the first great empire. And Israel was brought out of Egyptian bondage. Then what happens? You have Assyria as the next great empire. they're great for a while, and then they kind of let off, and then what happens? Book of Jonah. Jonah goes to them, repent, or in 40 days you'll be overthrown. They repent, and God brings them up to do what? To destroy, or shall we say, scatter Israel, the northern kingdom. And then they fall, you have Babylon. What's the purpose of Babylon? To scatter the southern kingdom, take them into exile. And then Babylon destroys them, Book of Daniel, right? And you have the Medo-Persian Empire. So the Medo-Persian Empire, at the outset and at the time of Esther, which is about 480 BC. What happens in the book of Esther? Remember the story of Esther? What happens?
She became a servant to the king and eventually wife to be Queen Esther.
Esther's going to become the queen. But what happens in that process of her, a Jew, a Judean who has not left the remains of the Babylonian Empire. She's in the Medo-Persian Empire. This is after the remnant of the exiles have come back to Judah, Jerusalem. They've rebuilt the temple because it's 480 BC, right? When was the temple rebuilt? We're talking about the 5 teens BC, okay? So even at this time, something is going on in the book of Esther.
Weren't they, one of the king's men were going to try to kill the Jews and her uncle Mordecai? Was that his name?
Mm-hmm.
And he was telling her about it and trying to get her to see if she could go and talk with the king to stop it. And she wasn't supposed to go see the king.
Unless he called her.
But she went in and he risked her life going in to talk with him.
Right. So, that's even, what, almost 40 years after this vision that Zechariah is seeing. But even at that time, there's persecution of the Jews in the Medo-Persian Empire. Haman is the guy's name. He's an Agagite. Well, why doesn't he like the Jews? If you trace his lineage back, there's a king called Agag that the Hebrews, the Israelites, kill early on, and he's a descendant of them. And that family holds a grudge against the Jews. So he has this plot. He's going to get the king, emperor, to kill all of the Jews. And Mordecai finds out about it, and he tells Esther, gets Esther to go in. Because the previous queen had gone in without requesting, or without being requested to come there, and she got deposed. And that's why Esther becomes the queen. And that's where the phrase, maybe you've come into the kingdom for such a time as this.
So where would Medo-Persia be? What area?
Medo-Persia?
Yeah.
It'd be in the area of Iran today.
Okay.
Iran was Persia, and the Persian Empire was like, I think maybe even Afghanistan, but then you come west, clear over, butting up against Syria, and maybe even controlled Syria and parts of, like down into Lebanon and Palestine. It was huge. But after World War They lost some in World War I, and the British took control, and after World War II, that became Iran, Iraq, they really split it up. And that's when Persia was done. And so you have all those different countries there. Iran would like to reestablish the Persian Empire, control that whole area. That's why they're fighting there again today. And they don't want us there. They don't want the Jews there either. Okay. But that gives you an idea of what was going on. So you see these. That's the broad view. These four empires that have done damage or doing damage to the children of Israel, so to speak. And it's not so much that they're doing damage to the children of Israel, they're interfering with God's plan. God's plan is to redeem mankind by sending His Son, the Messiah, into the world. Right? Return people to God. And that requires that there be a nation that He can come from, because he's got to become a human being to be able to do it. So, and under a covenant whereby he can come from a cleansed people, even though the people are not necessary. All right? Does that help to make sense on that broad view? The narrow view comes from Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 7 through 9. Okay? Who has that? Would like to read that?
Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, and the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed. Then they became very angry, and all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night.
Okay, so now you have the narrow view, which is right there in that time period. And you have Sanballat, Tobiah, is it Ammonites and Ashdodites? How many is that?
4.
4. And what do? They create what?
Confusion, chaos.
Confusion, chaos and confusion, right? What's this about? It's about order and confusion. What is God trying to do? Bring them back and create order. Go back, reestablish the temple, right? Build the temple, and then we'll reestablish the law, we reestablish the covenant, and we will build the city in the book of Nehemiah. Okay? Ezra is rebuilding the temple, here they're rebuilding the temple. Ezra, they're reinstituting the law and the covenant. Nehemiah, they're rebuilding the city. You see how that's bringing order out of the chaos, right? But here you have 4, Sanballat, Tobiah, the Ashdodites, and the Ammonites.
And the Arabs.
And they're Arabs, but they're all kind of together. But anyway, what are they doing? What are they doing? They're creating chaos and confusion to stop whose plan?
God's plan.
God's plan. So, like Craftsmen, going down here. Now, Zechariah 1, 20 through 21, then you have the 4 craftsmen. Okay, the horns scatter and they cause chaos, but now you have the craftsmen. What do craftsmen do? They take chaos and they bring order. When I was young, I liked to buy model cars and model ships and stuff and put them together. Back then you had to glue and all that stuff, and you take it out of the box, and what do you got? You got a bunch of chaos.
Extra parts.
Yeah, well, you end up with extra parts. Where did that go? But you take that chaos and you create order, and you've got something that is tangible there, that's complete and whole. And that's what a craftsman does. And even if you have something that's broken, a craftsman can go in and he can find it and replace a part or fix a part. Something that's broken is chaotic. Go in and fix it. Now it's in order. Okay? And that's what the 4 craftsmen are going to do. Well, who are the craftsmen? How about some of the ones we've been talking about? So, who was the governor that came back? Zerubbabel. And what does Zerubbabel mean? Remember I told you, the seed from Babel. Here was a seed that was left over here, and he's in the lineage of Jesus of Nazareth. We're going to bring him back. We're going to sow him in Jerusalem. And he's going to be in charge of the people, but he's also going to be in charge of rebuilding the temple. How about somebody else? How about Joshua? Who's Joshua? Joshua's going to be the high priest. We talked about him. Was his grandfather was Shealtiel, and then his father, but he's going to be the high priest. We're going to have a vision about him later on. Okay? And what's he going to do? He's going to be cleansed, and then he's going to cleanse the priesthood so they can do the work of sanctifying the temple and sanctifying the priesthood. See? Getting it all set back up. What are they doing? They're bringing order out of the chaos because they haven't done this for 70 years. All right? Ezra. And this is a few years later. What's he doing? He's coming back to do what? Read the law. Get them back. Renew the covenant and everything. And Nehemiah, he's coming back to rebuild the city. Build the wall. A tool in one hand and a sword in the other hand. And sometimes that's what you have to do if you're going to build. You got to be a craftsman and a warrior. And that's what he did with the people. But you see what they're doing. They're bringing order out of chaos, because without that order, you can't have God's will being done to bring the Christ into the world, even though it's going to be 400 years later, 480 years later, or whatever. Follow me? Nehemiah chapter 13. Verses 23 through 31. Nehemiah 13, 23. In those days I saw the Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah, but only the language of each people. And I confronted them. This is Nehemiah, okay? I confronted them and cursed them and beat some of them and pulled out their hair. And I made them take an oath in the name of God, saying, You shall not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, or for yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin on account of such women? Among the He didn't only have to rebuild the city. What does he have to do? He's got to rebuild a culture. A culture. Among the many nations, there was no king like him. And he was, and talking about Solomon, no king like him, and he was beloved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, foreign women made even him to sin. Shall we then listen to you and do all this great evil and act treacherously against our God by marrying foreign women? And when it's talking about foreign women, what's it really talking about?
Pagan women.
Women of a foreign religion. Yes, because we talked about women being heroes in the Moses account. How many women do we have in the Bible who were foreigners that were heroes? Ruth. Rahab. Just to name a couple. So verse 28, and one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was the son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Remember him? What was he? He was one, in the narrow view, one of the horns that was causing chaos and confusion. Right? Listen to this. Therefore I chased him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have desecrated the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleansed them from everything foreign and established the duties of the priests and Levites, each in his work, and I provided for the wood offering at appointed times and for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for good. Does that sound like a man with a tool in one hand and a sword in the other? And what was he willing? Where basically was his greatest opposition?
His own people.
His own people. He had to straighten them out first, didn't he? So which view do you think is the proper? Or do you think that maybe both views are there for our understanding? Or that the scriptures leave it ambiguous so you can look at both views and say, God's hand is so far into this that it could be either, it could be both. But
Combination of.
Combination. God is in control. And we can learn a lot of lessons from that, can't we? Can't we? The reestablishment of the Abrahamic and Mosaic covenants. Remember, the Abrahamic covenant was a promised covenant. It was a promise. It was based on a promise. In the book of Romans, right? Isn't it Romans? I think it was in Galatians too when we were studying Galatians. The covenant does not outweigh the promise. Doesn't change the promise. The covenant that God made with Israel through Moses does not outweigh or change the promise God made to Abraham, that his children would be like the sand on the seashore. Well, that wasn't going to happen just with Israel. It was going to happen because the Gentiles would come in eventually. That was with the coming of the Messiah. And you go back and you reread then when the Lord is talking to Abraham, you find, because now you know the New Testament, you see Christ in the book of Genesis. You see Christ in that promise. And the promise was to his, not offsprings, but to his offspring, singular. And I think that's the argument that Paul makes. Singular. To the seed, to Christ, which is the seed of a woman. And the promise of a child to Abraham was also of a woman, the woman of promise, which was Sarah. Not Hagar. Why not Hagar?
She was a foreigner.
She was one of these foreign women who worshipped pagan gods. Even though she was in Abraham's household, Sarah's handmaid, she wasn't the one. So, the reestablishment of the Abrahamic Mosaic covenants would be fulfilled in a period of peace under the auspices of the Medo-Persian rulers who found favor with the Judeans. And that's why that account in the book of Esther then becomes so very important. That's when the persecution of the Jews ends. In the book of Esther. It ends till you get down to when? The time of Herod and the Romans. Does that help? Have I gone too much into explanation, not enough into explanation? You see the historical ramifications of it? Is that for our time? No. And there's some people that would take try to make a broader view of it. Well, see, that's Russia, and that's Iran, and that's China, and that's what other name? North Korea. And they're coming to destroy Israel now. Well, that may be true, but that's not what this is talking about. It's not. Any questions or comments on that section? No? Okay. Let's see if we can do the next section this morning. Got a little bit of time if I get back to Zechariah chapter 2. Oh no, yeah. Zechariah chapter 2, verses 1 through 13. Vision of a man with a measuring line. And I need a Bible. Oh, I get one here. Mine just went down on my computer, so. Okay, Zechariah chapter 2, verses 1 through 13. Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a man with a measuring line in his hand. We've heard about this somewhere else, haven't we? Amos? Was it the book of Amos?
Yeah,
Huh?
the plumb line.
Plumb line, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I said, where are you going? And he said to me, to measure Jerusalem to see how wide it is and how long it is. And behold, the angel who was speaking with me was going out, and another angel was coming out to meet him, and said to him, run, speak to the young man, that's the young man with the measuring line, saying, Jerusalem will be inhabited without walls, because of the multitude of men and cattle within it. Now, notice that. That's important for us understanding this. Jerusalem will be inhabited without walls because of the multitude of men, but also cattle within it. For I, declares the Lord, will be a wall of fire around her, and I will be the glory in her midst. Ho there! Flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord, for I have dispersed you as the four winds of the heavens, declares the Lord. Where we heard about the four winds? Revelation, but also the first vision, right? The four angels, right? Ho Zion, escape you who are living with the daughter of Babylon. That's to those that are not the remnant who have stayed in Babylon. And again, those others who have not returned to Jerusalem. Verse 8, for thus says the Lord of hosts, after glory, he has sent me against the nations which plunder you. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. For behold, I will wave my hand over them so that they will plunder for their slaves. Where in the scriptures do we have slaves plundering a nation before? Where before in the scriptures do we have slaves plundering a nation?
Well, the Exodus.
Book of Exodus, yes. When, after the Passover, when the firstborn of the Egyptians was slaughtered, the next day the women were told, go to the Egyptian women and ask for their jewelry and all of this, and that way you plunder the Egyptians. See the repeat of history here? Then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me. Sing for joy and be glad, O daughter Zion, for behold, I am coming, and here's a key. I will dwell in your midst, declares the Lord. Many nations will join themselves to the Lord in that day and will become my people. There's another key for understanding this. Then I will dwell in your midst, and you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. The Lord will possess Judah as his portion in the Holy Land. What I think I told you in the introduction, it's the only place in the scriptures where Judah is considered the Holy Land, called the Holy Land. The only place. And will again choose Jerusalem. Be silent, all flesh, before the Lord, for he is aroused from his holy habitation. Now there's a lot there, and let me check. It's 14 minutes after, but I think I can give you enough of a purview of this. Okay. I'm going to change this so I can look up there and look there. Because I know what I've got here. I just want to make sure that I'm pointing out to you. So, the vision of a man with a measuring line, okay? It's God's ultimate purpose. Remember what I told you? It wasn't so much that these four horns were fighting against just what Zerubbabel and Joshua and Ezra and Nehemiah were doing. They were fighting against God's purpose, the Lord's purpose. The ultimate purpose. What was his ultimate purpose? Bring the Christ or Messiah into the world. All right? So Zechariah chapter 2 verses 1 through 5, Jerusalem will be without walls. But wait a minute, what did Nehemiah do?
Built the wall.
The city-
He built the walls. So this isn't talking about physical Jerusalem, is it? It's not talking about Jerusalem at that time. Yes, there would be a physical Jerusalem, and that physical Jerusalem would have walls, but there's going to be another Jerusalem that doesn't have walls. Does that make sense? You following? Okay. Not only would the temple be rebuilt, but the city of Jerusalem, the city would grow and prosper under the Lord's protection. What's the Lord's protection? The Lord would be a wall of fire around it. All right? So, where do we go to find a Jerusalem with a temple, has no physical walls, but the Lord is the protection around it? Nothing evil can come into it. Inside is protection. The people are safe and they're the Lord's people. What are we looking at?
When Jesus comes,
Okay. Hebrews chapter 12. Verse 24. Start there, and I'll tell you when to stop.
And to Jesus, the mediator of a new
Okay,
covenant.
go back one. You have come to Mount,
Verse 22.
yeah, verse 22, I'm sorry.
Okay. That you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in the festival gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. And and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel.
Okay, so that Jerusalem without walls,
the church.
it has to be the church. And you could argue and say, well, that means heaven. But what the assembly of the firstborn is the church. Okay? So that is the Jerusalem that it's a temple, right? We're a spiritual temple. The church is spiritual temple. What, 1 Peter chapter 2? Build up living stones. And it's called New Jerusalem. It grows and it prospers under the Lord's protection. The Lord knows His own, right? Are there walls? Not necessarily. Are there gates? Yeah, there's a way in. You know what? If there's a way in, there's a way out too. But who takes care of that? Well, the Lord takes care of that. But here's what's being talked about is this new covenant that's coming, a Jerusalem without walls, and the measuring line. Okay, what's going to be that measuring line? Okay, well, don't measure this temple. Don't measure this physical Jerusalem, because there's another Jerusalem coming that's greater than this, is what this vision is alluding to. Does that make sense? Okay. Then Zechariah chapter 2, verse 6 through 9. Zechariah's message then to the people. All right? And not just the people of Jerusalem, to the people of the north, and to the people of Medo-Persia, or Babylon, the Jews who remained in Babylon were warned to flee to Jerusalem. Flee to physical Jerusalem? Flee to that city where Zerubbabel and Joshua and Ezra and Nehemiah were? No, no. What Jerusalem are they to flee to?
The spiritual.
Right. When the new covenant comes, hey, go to the Messiah. Trust in the Messiah. And again, you go to the book of Hebrews, what? The old covenant's done away, there's a new covenant. We'll talk this morning. If the old covenant had been without fault, what? It'd still be remaining. But now there's a new covenant. Thus, this way shall all Israel be saved. Revelation, is that Revelation 11? Romans 11? Okay. What way? Through the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's how all Israel can be saved. Coming to belief in Jesus as the Messiah. All right? So they need to escape. Elements in Babylon would rebel, and Persia would put the rebellions down in 519 and 514 BC. Okay? That's why you have some of the troubles going on clear down to 480 BC. And that's from secular history. So, hey, you need to escape. You could say that even down in the book of Esther, when Haman plots to have all the Jews killed, hey, well, they should have run to Jerusalem. No, trust in God, because what? From the book of Hosea, planting a seed there. Planting a seed there that 500 years later, the gospel's going to come there. After the Messiah comes and offers that sacrifice in Jerusalem, the gospel's going to be shared to the world, and through that seed's going to grow, the synagogues are going to be there, and men like the Apostle Paul are going to come and preach that new covenant there. So be ready for the new Jerusalem to come to where you are. Has New Jerusalem come here? Does New Jerusalem come here? Yeah. Yeah. You don't have to go there physically. It's come to you. And you can be a part of it because it's a spiritual kingdom. So the Jews had been plundered in 586 BC, but many had become rich in Babylon. They didn't want to go back to Jerusalem to live in huts and whatever for a while. And then, who are you going to do business with in Jerusalem? Sanballat and Tobiah won't do business with you. The Ashdodites and the Ammonites and whatever the other one was, they won't do business with you. They don't like you. Hey, I got a business here. I'm doing pretty good. I'm bringing spices in from India and trading them over here. And I think I want to stay here. I'm prosperous. Okay, stay there. You got a synagogue. Preach, teach the law of Moses, and get some of those Gentiles interested in monotheism, that there is one God. And then when New Jerusalem comes, they'll want to hear it. Oh, your descendants may not want to hear it, but they'll want to hear it. That's what that seed that is sown in Hosea is talking about. All right? And then, so thus the plundered had figuratively plundered the plunderer, because what happens to the Medo-Persian Empire? It's destroyed by the Grecian Empire. What happens to the Grecian Empire? It's destroyed by the Roman Empire. What happens to the Roman Empire? it's a lot of the wealth of the Roman Empire goes to the church. But the problem is, when the church becomes the state religion, it changes the church. And the church becomes apostate. But that's another lesson for another time. So, Zechariah chapter 2, verses 10 through 13 talks about the greater glory. Who's got that?
Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I am coming, and I will dwell in your midst, says the Lord.
I will dwell in your midst. Does Christ dwell in the midst of his church? What is that in Matthew? Matthew 28, verse 20. And lo, I am with you always. Was that clear down to 13? Or
No,
did
that
I-
was just verse 10.
Okay.
Many nations shall be joined to the Lord in that day, and they shall become my people. And I will dwell in your midst, then you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. And the Lord will take possession of Judah as his inheritance in the Holy Land, and will again choose Jerusalem. Be silent, all flesh, before the Lord, and he is aroused from his holy, for he is aroused from his holy habitation.
Yeah. And where is his holy habitation?
In heaven.
Yeah, it's not Jerusalem in the Middle East. It's heaven. And from Hebrews 12, 22 through 24, all right, Mount Zion is figurative of heaven. New Jerusalem, figurative of heaven and the church. Okay? And would that not also be Judah and the faithful? What's it talking about? Don't measure this. Don't measure this city. Something greater is coming. Something greater of glory. And verse 13, the Lord has spoken. See that? You see that? The Lord has spoken. What's the first, 2 or 3 verses of Hebrews chapter 1? And many times, in many places, God spoke to the fathers by the prophets, but in these last days, he has spoken to us through his Son. The Lord has spoken. The Lord has spoken to us through his word. Spoke to them. It was important to build that temple. It was important to rebuild that city. It was important to reestablish that covenant, that priesthood, all of those things, but for a particular reason. And that reason is the reason that we have today for our faith, our hope, and our love for God. Does that make sense?
Where we are taking this to the church being the New Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't it go as far back as the individual body? Our bodies are temples that constitute the church. It constitutes the New Jerusalem. See my thinking there? This is so far, 500 years of prophecy and telling them that, go forth this way, gives the directions, has to start with the body, doesn't it? Which constitutes the church, which constitutes the new heaven. Are we going far enough back past the church?
Or when you're saying the body, you're talking about our individual bodies, or are you talking about the body of faith?
Each person.
As each person makes a determined effort. And yeah, that's one of the things that I've talked about from what the Apostle Paul says in Book of Romans. Not all Israel is Israel. If we just take the basic meaning, Israel means he who struggles with God. Not everyone in Israel struggled with God, to know God and to walk in God's way. But
it's a personal thing.
It's a very personal thing. But the challenge,
And I may be the body as the physical body as a temple is the construction by the craftsman Christ that builds the church. See where I'm thinking? Into this section right here. Not disputing, I'm adding to.
yeah. I'm trying to grasp what you're saying there. They have to build the temple. And they have to build the city. Because that's a part of God's purpose. When the Messiah comes, he's going to build a spiritual temple. He's going to build a spiritual city. Right.
But in their time, they have to have a temple under the covenant.
Right. To fulfill the terms of the covenant, because they have to do the animal sacrifices in order to pass over the sins
that will
until the true sacrifice comes.
That will replace the new covenant, that will replace the one in your left hand.
Right. And it's like, let's use Paul's analogy in the book of Galatians. All right. When we were children, we had to learn how to do everything, except instinctually we knew how to suck.
Yeah.
Some of us, that's all we know how to do in life. We suck. Okay. How we use the word, right? No. Instinctively, a child knows how to suck. Everything else, they've got to learn how to eat. They will know how to sleep, right? But then regulate sleep and wake hours. Learn how to crawl, then walk, and be craftsmen. Children are great at creating chaos, 3 o'clock in the morning, right? You know, bring order into their lives. And religiously, man was not capable of understanding the order that God wanted to bring, needed to bring in the new covenant. The question would be, why didn't the Messiah come in the garden when Adam and Eve sinned? Why didn't he just come then? And hey, they could have crucified him. There were plenty of trees around. Just nail him to one of those trees, and he could have shed his blood there and provided. Why didn't he do that? They weren't ready for that, were they? They had to learn a lot of discipline up to that time. So man wasn't ready. Man wasn't ready. The pagans weren't ready. The Gentiles, they weren't ready. The Jews weren't ready. Okay? But the physical, we learn through the physical things, spiritual things.
Amen.
And then once from the physical things, we learn the spiritual things. And I believe this is Paul's analogy. We need to let go of the weak and beggarly elements of the physical things and become a spiritual people. Some can't do that. Some have to have those rituals of things that they don't even understand. Have the worship service in a language that you don't even understand. Stand up, sit down, say amen, say this, do you know.
I'm thinking all of the props.
Well, that's
They have to have all the props
Yes.
to
Wouldn't that be,
conduct their, I guess if you want to call it, form of worship.
wouldn't that be like?
Which relates back to so much of it, the pagan forms of worship. And you can even see a degree of that in, shall we say, the worship under the old covenant, that there was animal sacrifice. There was the use of incense that represented this or that. All those kinds of things. But and there was symbolism. There was a symbolism in the tabernacle. It was shaped like this. So there was a hierarchy. Here's God, and then here's where you are. But still, that was leading to a spiritual thing. That's what God was trying to get mankind to. And that's why Paul could say that in the fullness of time, when man was ready to actually accept, and not even all of mankind, but just a remnant of mankind was ready to accept it, God sent forth his Son. Because there still had to be those who were there who were willing to nail the perfect man to a cross.
And I think another way of saying that would be a significant portion of mankind to carry out
Yeah.
the same thing. Very good, thank you.
But as for the body, we carry out in the body what the mind and the spirit are. How do I want to put it? What we envision is what we carry out. And if we're envisioning the things of God, that's what we will carry out. If we are envisioning in our hearts, our minds, our spirits, the fruit of the Spirit, that's what we will be carrying out in the body.
Right.
Right. But when it comes down to it, I'll mention this in the sermon, it's what will a man give in exchange for his soul? You know, what would it profit a man if he would gain the whole world and lose his own body?
So,
No, it's soul. And when if we make the mistake of putting our physical body in there, then we do things to save the body, preserve the body, but we forget about the soul. You understand what I'm saying there?
well, from the
Then
very
we make
beginning,
that big
that's
mistake.
true with Eve. With that, that's true even with Adam and Eve. They brought that on. They invented it.
Well, they had a little help.
Yeah, but still,
You will be like God.
throughout all creation, that's man's failure
Yeah.
unto God. We could just do this all day, you know?
I know, it's a wonderful thing, and it takes time, doesn't it? But we'll stop there, and